And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Wanda Hawke, who had a family reunion during her near-death experience, which we're going to learn about and more. Wanda, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wanda, I didn't say it in the beginning, but actually you've had two near-death experiences. So let's start with your first one.
Okay. The first one happened when I just turned 9. I'm 63 now. I was 1969. I had just turned 9, and it was a boating accident where I actually drowned. And as things went on, I didn't see stairway. I didn't see angels. I didn't see God. What I did see was, the best I can describe it is like a family reunion where everybody knew everybody. Excuse me. And the warmth and the love was absolutely amazing. I liken it to being in front of a roaring fire on a very cold night and being wrapped in a quilt. It's that much love that I felt. And I'm sorry. And let me get into the story. So I had just turned 9 in May, and the accident happened the first week of June. My family were supposed to get together with an aunt and an uncle and go on a picnic. But at the last minute, a friend of my father's called and asked if he and the family could go up to where he was having his cottage built and help with some of the building of the cottage. So my father at the last minute decided to, instead of going with his sister and that side of the family, he would go with his friend Bob instead. So it was about an hour and a bit, maybe 2 hours to get to the lake. And we got there, and the lake was very pretty, surrounded by a lot of nature, very few houses around. And for some reason, I remember the lake was very round. Like there was, I don't know, that's just a memory I had. So anyways, what happened was in the morning, the men were working on the cottage and the children were playing. And, you know, there was my father's friend, Bob, and his wife, whose name was Nora. They had 2 children who were still in diapers. And then there was my father, my mom, my older sister, Debbie, myself, and my younger brother, David, who was about 2 years younger than me. So the men did some building of the cottage and then decided to go fishing. They had a little fishing boat. And they came back for their lunch on the shore, and Bob had promised that he would take the kids out in the boat. Now, here's where it gets difficult, because I've had people blame and, put blame and shame people for what happened next. So there was also 2, possibly 3 other men there that day. I don't remember if there was a third, but for some reason, 2 doesn't seem right. And they were on the shore along with my father, and Bob and his wife, my mother, and 5 children got into, which is 8, got into a boat that was only meant to hold 5 people. And you have to remember, it was 1969, and life jackets weren't as prevalent as they are now, if they had them at all back then. I don't know. I was too young to remember. But we all got into the boat, and the boat was working fine, and it got out to about the middle of the lake, and the engine conked out, and it upset my mother and Bob's wife, Nora, and they stood up when water started going into the boat. And that caused the boat to capsize. So Nora was on one side of the boat with my sister Debbie hanging on by her fingernails. Mother was on the other side of the boat, again hanging on by her fingernails. And none of the adults could swim that were in the boat. So Mother and Nora were able to reach the two babies and get them seated back on the top of the boat that had capsized. They weren't heavy enough to sink the boat any further. And Debbie was on the side with Nora, and apparently what I was told was she panicked. And they say when you're panicking, when you're drowning, you're 10 times stronger. And the story I was told was that she actually pulled Nora under. So anyways, so while this was going on, my brother was thrown from the boat too far away for anybody to reach that was in the boat. And he had one of those artificial leather jackets on, and it was zipped quite up tight. And what I was told was air got up underneath it, and it acted as a life jacket for him. And apparently I was hanging on to him somehow, but I was under the water. Sorry. So when the men on the shore realized that there was an accident, they came to the rescue as quick as they possibly could. The way the lake was built, there was a swampy area that they had to run around to get to closer to where the boat had capsized. There was a boat on the shore, but it didn't have any oars. So what I was told was my father jumped into the river, into the lake, and swam out to where the boat had capsized. The other two or three men finally did find a boat that they could get to us, and everybody was rescued except for Nora, because they didn't find her yet. Mother was not inside the new boat, but clinging on to the side because they were afraid that it would capsize again. They were able to find David, my brother, but when they got a hold of me, I was lifeless. No signs of life. And so while there was no signs of life, what I saw was the family reunion. And the room was semi-dark, so I really couldn't make out colors or shapes or faces, but it was very crowded. But I knew everybody. For some reason, I just knew that I knew everybody. And it was like cousins and relations and friends, and everybody was very happy to see me. And suddenly I saw my grandmother walk towards me, and she'd passed away the year before. And she came to me and she said, "Wanda, it's not your time. You have to go back." And I said, "But Granny, I like it here. Can I not stay with you?" And she said, "No, Wanda, you can't." So as I was, clinging on to her, suddenly my father showed up, and he said the same thing. He said, "Wanda, you can't stay here." And I said, "But Daddy, why can't I stay with you and Granny?" And he says, "It's not your time. And I want you to promise me that you're going to go back and take care of your mother." So with that, I woke up in a strange room in a house I'd never been in before. I had no clothes on. I was just covered with a blanket. And what I was told was one of the men had seen a newfangled thing called CPR on TV recently. And he said he didn't know if it would help, but he said he remembers what he saw, and let's try it. So that's what brought me back, was him doing the CPR. So that was basically my first near death. And I had no idea that my father had died in the boat accident. Nor did I know that my sister had died. I had an aunt and uncle had come up to pick up my brother and I, and Mother stayed there. And Nora was found right away. And they found my father 2.5 days later. He had jumped when there was no oars in the boat. He jumped into the lake, and he was an excellent swimmer. There's a place, we have a river that runs down through the city, and it's called Ottawa River. And he used to, as a teenager, swim the whole width of the river just for fun. So he was really good at swimming. But apparently, by the time he got to Debbie again, she was panicked to the point that they figure she pulled him under. And when they did find him 2 days, 2.5 days later, they went, of course, he was floating by that point. They went and they grabbed him, and he literally had his arms around my sister. He had actually gotten that close to her, and they were able to take them both to shore because he had his arms around her. It was, as you can see, even all these years later, I still get very emotional about it. But I do feel it's changed my life.
Wanda, thank you for sharing your experience with us. You were really young when this happened, but even so, how did your life change afterwards, spiritually or psychically speaking?
Okay, as I said, I didn't see a God or angels or anything else like that. But as a child of 9 and 10 years old, I was getting myself up for Sunday school every Sunday. And none of my family on either sides were religious. It was just something I felt I needed to do. And I have done it almost my whole life. The only time that I do not go to church is not because of my belief in God, but because of the way the people in church are treating other people. So my belief in God has always been extremely strong. And it's made me always want to help people, and always, every job I ever had was always helping. I was babysitting by the time I was 11. I became a nurse. I was the youngest in my class the year we graduated. After my kids were grown and I was too old to get back into nursing, I went back and I did a semblance of social work. And now I work in a men's homeless shelter. And to me, that's all because I feel I was put in those places when and where I was needed.
Did you notice that you had any psychic abilities after this experience?
Yes. In fact, it kind of freaked out my family. As a child, I just labeled it the knowing. Simple things like if the phone rang more than twice, I would know who was on the other end. If I phoned a friend to see if they would come out and play, it didn't matter if they had one sibling or no siblings or 9 siblings. If the phone rang more than twice, I would know whether that friend was there on the other end or not. I developed something that I called my phone home dreams, which they even blow me away sometimes. I started dream the way a normal dream would start. But suddenly somebody would come to me that I would or would not know, and they would say, "You need to call home. It's very important." I couldn't find a phone. The phone I found was broken. The number was disconnected. There was just no way to get through. And then I would wake up and I'd fall back asleep, and then it would be more urgent. You need to call home. It's important. And the first time I realized that it was actually an intuition dream was 1 year after I was nursing. I was away for a long weekend and I had my phone home dream. So I phoned my mother and I said, "I'll pay for the long distance charges. I just need to know what's wrong with Grandpa." Because when I wake up, I always know who the phone home dream would be about. Not necessarily what was wrong, but it was about that person. And so I called her and I said, "I'll pay for the phone call. I just need to know what's wrong with Grandpa." And she said, she sort of took a breath in, and then she didn't know how to answer me. He's in ICU right now. He had a severe anxiety and the heart angina attack last night. And because of his age, they're keeping him there for a few days. And it was then that it dawned on me that, oh my goodness, that's what happens with my phone home dream. And I've had it over the years with all kinds of different people in different situations. One time in PEI, I was there for a wedding and had never been to PEI before. The bride's mother was showing us through the church, and I get into this back room, and it's like a party room, whatever they called it back then in that particular church, the gathering space. And I get back there, and I could smell fire and smoke quite badly, and it's cloying. And so I thought, I need to get out of here. So I left the building, and I just thought it was because I was in PEI and it was summer and somebody was burning leaves. And then I went back into the building and had to go through the same room to go to the washroom a little bit later. And I got this overwhelming sense of grief. I mean, it was horrible. It was like somebody throwing a wet, hot blanket over you. It was so strong. And again, I had to leave the gathering space to come to find out later that they didn't have a funeral parlor in their city or town, and that's where they had all the funerals. So I thought, oh, okay. And then that night I had my phone home dream, and I dreamt it was my mother's best friend's second husband. I knew it was him. And my husband refused to allow me to call Ottawa, even though mother would have accepted the charges and I would have paid her back. We're no longer married. So he basically called me Wanda the Witch for years because of my knowings. And he refused to allow me to call home. So I literally waited until I was within Ottawa city limits, made him stop. And I called home and I said, I had my dream. What's going on with Phyllis's husband? And I was thinking maybe it's another heart attack because he'd had one like 6 months before. She says, what do you mean? And I told her what happened. And again, she kind of paused, and then she said, he's okay, but his daughter and 2 of his grandchildren died in a fire on the weekend. So that was like, sometimes it even frightens me. To the point where when my grandfather was getting older and we had such a strong bond, I literally prayed to God to please take this knowing away from me unless I'm able to do something to help. Like, I don't want to know, about somebody dying in a fire or somebody having heart attacks and stuff like that. Unless I can help, don't tell me.
Makes sense. All right, well, let's move forward to your second NDE.
So as I said, I became a nurse. And at the time, I was a very young nurse, maybe 22 at the very oldest. And I had to have my wisdom teeth out. And at the time, I was asthmatic. Zazu, enough. At the time, I was asthmatic, and the dentist didn't feel comfortable taking my wisdom teeth out in his office. So he made arrangements for me to go to hospital to have them done in day surgery. The only thing was that Ottawa is a pretty big city, but with not a lot of hospitals. So he chose to allow me to go to a hospital like one town over. So mother drove me there and dropped me off. And I guess the extraction went well. But in recovery room, I had a reaction to the anesthetic and my heart stopped. And in my, while this was going on in the recovery room, I could hear all the bells and whistles of a code. And I could see the nurses and the doctors bringing the crash cart in to the bed where the person is that's has coded. But I'm standing in the corner watching, and I'm thinking, well, I need to get in there and do my job, So I went over to the bed, and they wouldn't let me in. I couldn't get close enough to do my part of the code. And I'm getting really angry, like really, like I know what I'm doing. Let me in there. Let me do my job. And next thing you know, I'm up on the ceiling or on a higher plane, and I'm looking down, and I'm watching what's going on around, like around the patient. And then I look at the patient and I realize, oh, that's me. Just like that, like no concern or anything else, just like, oh, wow. So they did what they had to do, and they were able to get me back, obviously. And the doctor came in and he said, "Okay, Wanda," he said, your surgery went well, but we had a little blip. Um, you're okay now, but we're going to keep you for a few extra hours before we send you home." And I looked at him and I said, "I died." And he looked at me and said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I stopped breathing and my heart stopped. You guys had to code me." And he said, "Well, yeah, but it was just for like quickly, like a minute, like almost like, big deal. It happened, right?" He said, "You're back. You're fine. We're just going to keep you a couple more hours." And I said, "I watched you do it." And he says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I was right there. I saw the whole thing." And he said, "No, Wanda, you're a nurse. You know what we do in during codes. You probably just think you saw what you did." And I said, "Oh, really?" And I can't remember what I said because it was so long ago. But I looked at him and I said, "But you told that nurse," and I pointed to her, and I said something that had nothing to do with nursing or being a doctor. I said, "You told that nurse that thing." And he went completely white, like his face dropped. And then he looked at me and he looked at the nurse, and I've never seen a doctor move so fast in my life. He just got right out of there. And then on the way back home, I told my mother the same story. And she said the same thing the doctor said. "Well, you know what they do during a code." And I said, "No, this is what happened." So that was the second one. Um, and with that, again, like I said, I was a nurse. And after that, I spent a lot of time with patients that were near death. Um, in fact, now there's something called a death doula. And I wish that they had them. I know they have them here in Canada, but it's very expensive to be able to get certified for one. And the only one that I could find was over $4,000, and I'd have to travel to the States and put myself up to get it done, and it's just not in my budget. But what what would happen was I started to go and sit beside the beds of people that were near death, and whether they had family there or whether they were there alone, especially if they were there alone, I would go and sit by their bed and just talk quietly to them, let them know that somebody's there that cares. If it was the middle of the night, I would even bring a book and just sit with them. Um, if the patient's family needed to go for a rest or whatever, then they knew that they could count on me. And the nurses that I worked with also knew if they couldn't find me and there was a patient dying on the floor, they probably figured out pretty quick where I was. And with that, I was blessed to see two souls leave their bodies at the time of death.
What did they look like when they were leaving?
So they were very different, which kind of surprised me. The first one was, the e-cigarettes, the vaping that they do now. So that's what it was like some that it's actually quiet. Somebody taking a good pull on an e-cigarette and then releasing the steam. Well, that's what I saw coming from the heart area, was this release of essence. And I just knew that it was the patient's soul. That was one of them. and it just sort of dissipated in the air. And I did the, check the heart and check the time of death and went on, did my job. The second one was a little bit different, and I'm thinking it's because I knew her better. She was a patient that had been in and out for 4 months. She was actively dying. Her family was exhausted, staying by her bed 24/7. And they said they really needed to get, she had a teenage daughter. They really needed to get the daughter home to get something to eat. And she needed a break. And I said, that's fine. I've already checked with the other nurses, and they know that I'm going to stay with your family member. So I'm sitting in the room, and I've been talking to her quietly, as I usually did. And I happened to look away for a second, and then out of the corner of my eye, I don't want to call it a ghost, but it's the best explanation. I saw the patient sit up out of the body. So the body was still in the bed, but the patient's ghost, that again, I don't know what another word to use, sat up and kind of looked around, and then stood up, but she was standing on a level or a plane that I didn't see. So it was like she was like one step up higher than where I was. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
Okay, so she stood up on that plane. She turned around and she looked at her body, and then she just walked off into the corner and was gone.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was truly amazing. And I think that's why I want to be able to do more near death and dying work.
Have you ever had a shared death experience?
I might have a hard time getting through this, but yes, I have. My brother, who I talked about, was younger than me. He was 2 years younger than me. And he struggled with addiction his whole life. And 3 years ago, he was finally at end life with cirrhosis. He lives a couple of towns away from me, and I don't drive. So I got to talk to him about 4 days before he died, and before he was too sickly to be able to talk to me anymore. So it was very interesting. It was after I spoke with him on the phone and before he passed away, I was in bed for the night, but I wasn't sleeping. I know I wasn't asleep. And all of a sudden, my brother was in that same family reunion room that I saw when I was 9, but he was way on the other side. And I knew that he wasn't gone. I just knew that he was not gone, but he was very confused, and he wasn't able to see what I saw. He didn't see the relatives, the friends, the loved ones around him. He was extremely confused. And I tried to get closer to him, but I don't know. I could never get close enough to him. He was always that distance away from me. And I even tried shouting, but he didn't hear me. And so that was the beginning of it. And then after he passed away, a couple of days before Christmas, when they say that you have your life review and it's like a movie on a screen or around you or whatever. Well, for some reason, I was given the opportunity. Sorry, this is really hard. I was given the opportunity to be able to see his very early life review from the time he was the age of the accident, which would have been 6, because he wouldn't have been 7 until August. So from the time he was 6 till he was 12. And we had a tumultuous relationship. After my father died, mother I'm sorry, he's being really noisy. After my father died, mother played us against each other constantly. And he was her favorite. He could do no wrong. And because my father had said, take care of your mother, I also I took on the role of taking care of my brother. Mother wasn't able to get out of bed until 2, 3 in the afternoon. And we went to the same public school. And in the review, I remember as a child, he was holding my hand so tight that it hurt until he saw the driveway that you have to go up to get to the school. And then suddenly he let go and he was gone with his friends. So in the review, it showed me this, and it showed me that he was absolutely terrified of losing me. And he didn't know how to voice it. So he was extremely clingy and extremely needy to me, especially because my mother was starting to have mental health problems. And I was basically at 9 years old having to raise my own brother. So I saw that, and I saw him, the pain that he was in for the loss of our father. And I saw how I thought mother treated him like the golden boy. Well, it wasn't like that at all. She was just as abusive to him as she was to me, but never in front of me. So he would cling on to me because I was the only thing that he had that was safe. And it was very profound to me. And it stopped. I didn't see anything past his age of 12 because he took a very bad left turn and resulting in addiction and the alcoholism and stuff like that. But it showed me that he was in as much pain as I was. And I was, his rock until suddenly at 12, he found a different way to go. So after seeing that, it made me understand him more. It made me there was a time when we were teenagers, we hated each other. We couldn't stand to be in the same room. And it wasn't until we had children of our own that we actually spoke to each other. We were estranged for years. And after seeing his review to that point, even though he was gone, it gave me understanding, and it gave me a profound sense of love instead of the animosity that I felt towards him for most of my life. So it showed me just how profoundly he was also how profoundly he was affected from the boat accident as well as myself.
So after experiencing that life review, did you just feel like the weight of the world lifted off your shoulders?
It made me understand my brother so much more. And for a while, I was very sad because we never got to have the proper closure. But at least I think, given the opportunity to see his life review to that point, helped me to understand the pain that he was in all those years.
It's amazing. Have the memories of those experiences, and what I mean is the NDEs, have those faded over time?
No. I mean, I think you could see it on my face, how I was affected. Not at all. It's when I talk about it, I'm right back in there. In fact, I do have chronic depression, and I find a month before the date of the accident, it's even heavier. And I literally, I can lie in bed sometimes and I can feel myself drowning again. And I mean, that was 1969 that it happened. Whereas the second one gave me the gift of understanding death and understanding what people go through at the end and wanting to be there to help them. Like I said, I thought it might be a calling for myself, but the cost of taking the courses is just too much. So I completely turned around, and I think I said it already. I went back to school when I was 58 and decided to take a course that I would be able to work with addictions. To work with addictions and homeless men and understanding what they go through. One thing I find that I'm doing, my son gets upset with me, is I always try to make somebody's day better. Even if I'm on a city bus and I see somebody with a nice handbag, or I like the color of their coat, or they have an unusual hair color, I'll say, hey, that looks great, or where did you get that? And I find just that little interaction, because you don't know what their life is right now, and just smiling at somebody and acknowledging them, can make their day so much better.
It's interesting that you say that, because some of my near-death experiencers will find out during their life review that it's the little things like what you're doing that matter the most.
Yes. I believe that. Working with homeless people and addictions is very difficult. You got your good days and you got your bad days, of course. But I mean, they're a human being too. I mean, they're somebody's brother or uncle or sister, they were a child at one point. You don't know what their life was to get them to the window that they're in front of me. I don't know what their life is like. So if there's anything I can do to help their life be a little bit better, then I try to do it, to the point where most people just go by first names nowadays. And I always, especially with the ones that are, older, as in my age, I will call them Mr. or Mrs. until they give me permission to say, oh no, call me Jim, or I find with addictions, they prefer to go by their first name, or they have a street name. So again, it's not my place to own what their name is until they give me that permission.
You've been to the other side twice. So do you fear death at all?
Not at all. Not at all. I am looking forward to the family reunion.
If you had a friend that was suffering from the loss of a loved one, what kind of advice would you give?
Basically, I give them I try to say the same thing all the time. Of course, there's the platitudes. Oh, they're in a better place. They're no longer in pain. Sometimes that doesn't work. I mean, an example was, I was also a pastoral care worker. Again, because of my near-death experiences, when I was in my 30s, I took a course. And it was basically being an assistant to the pastor of the church that I was, and it was an actual course. And it was a very sad case. It was a mentally challenged adult who was in his 30s, and he lived with his mother, who was in her 70s, and she had a severe stroke. And the hospital didn't realize that he was mentally challenged, and told him that she won't be coming home, that she's not going to get any better. I don't know if this is my story to tell. Anyways, he happened to live in my apartment building, and he committed suicide. He went home from the hospital and he jumped. Hazel. And then the pastor was away for the weekend, and she called me up and she says, hey, this is going to be your first call. I need you to go up to the hospital and tell that mother that her son is dead. And at first I was really upset, because I thought, like, that's not a job for a lay person. but the pastor was out of town and there was nobody else available. So I actually went to the hospital and told her who I was and that we were neighbors. We lived in the same building. And I was sorry that she was doing so poorly. And then I had to tell her about what happened to her son. And she got very angry. And who wouldn't? She was very, very angry. And she didn't want to talk to anybody. And I asked her if she wanted to pray. And she said no. I said, do you want to read the Bible? And she said no. I said, is there anybody I could call? And she said, he was everything. I had nothing else. And I said, okay, I'm just going to sit here for a while. And I sat and I was holding her hand and she kept looking at me and I could tell she was angry. And I looked right at her and I said, it's okay to be mad at God. If that's the way you feel right now, there's no reason why you can't be mad at him. And she looked at me. She said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, you can be mad at God if you want. I mean, I would be mad as hell right now if I were you. So I gave her permission to be able to feel that way. And she told me a couple of days later that made a difference. It made her be able to get through to the next day. So again, most of the time I use my intuition, my empath. I use quite frequently to know how to reach somebody, whether it be one of my addictive clients, whether it be someone I've never met on the bus before, but somebody I have the feeling needs to have an interaction with another human being. Then I always, not always, but most of the time, I end up knowing the right thing to say.
Did you become an animal lover before your NDE or afterwards?
I always loved animals, but my mother would not allow them. So I always loved everybody else's, the neighborhood animals. And I guess I kind of went overboard the other way, because right now we call it the Hawk Zoo. I have 4 birds, 2 cats, a dog, and 2 fish.
I wasn't sure if Hazel was making the sound of the dog or there wasn't actually a dog in your house.
Oh no, she's here. Yeah.
Well, that's great.
So,
Wanda,
and if I had a big house, I would probably have a lot more.
Wanda, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Sure.
What's the best way to reach you?
It would be my email that I'd given you earlier.
I guess I can just put your email in the video description.
Sure.
All right. Well, before we finish up, can you give us one more positive message?
One thing I've learned is love never dies. You could have lost somebody. I don't know, do the math. I'm not good at mathing. 1969, I lost my father and my sister. Some days I feel them right here beside me. I ended up losing my husband through a heart attack 13 years ago. And every once in a while, when I'm having a bad time, he comes and he knocks on my door and comes and sits in the living room and talks to me for a while. If that sounds absolutely crazy, well, welcome to my world. Love never dies, and true love is always there. And when you think that you're all alone and you don't think anybody loves you, look around. There's somebody there that really cares.
Wanda, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
And thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.